Good morning, everybody. I see that people are just joining now, so I'm going to let people have a minute or two to log on and join our webinar today. Okay, well, it's 10:01. It looks like it's slowed down a little bit as far as people logging on. So I want to welcome everybody to the Florida Friendly Landscaping Professional Webinar Series. Today's webinar is Using Water Wisely, Irrigation Design Standards. I'm really looking forward to hearing about this topic. You may have noticed your microphones have been muted, so please put any questions you have in the chat box and we'll take them at the end of the presentation. This webinar has been approved for 1 CEU for FFLCP, LIAF, FDAX, LF, LCLM, LLO, CLO, and ONT, DBPR Landscape Architecture CEU, and 1 FNGLA CEU. I suspect it's also approved for 1 Florida Water Star CEU. Awesome. There is a $15 administration fee to receive a certificate of continuing education. I'll put a link to that in the chat box. If you'd like to make payment after the webinar, you can go ahead and do that. We won't submit the CEUs until Friday, just to give people a chance to register and put in their licensing information to receive that CEU. And this webinar is part of a monthly webinar series that we hold on the second Tuesday of the month at 10 a.m. So next month on March 12th is Wildlife Friendly Landscaping, Connecting Professionals and the Public, and that's with Dr. Laura Werner. Also, you'll see a survey invitation pop up, so please take a moment to fill this out, as it really helps us determine what type of educational programming we're going to offer in the future. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tom Wickman to introduce today's speakers.
Claire, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's an exciting day because we have 2 amazing presenters. So the introduction may be just a little longer than normal, but we'll start first introducing Emily Lang. She's an environmental administrator with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's Non-Point Source Management Program. She has a master's in natural resource policy and administration and has worked with DEP for 6 years. During that time, her primary role has been as the project manager for the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. As such, she facilitated the updates to the FFL and Irrigation Design Standards. Today, she'll present an overview on the updates and provide a status update on the document. Also presenting today is Deirdre Irwin. She is the Water Conservation Coordinator for the St. Johns River Water Management District. With over 32 years of experience with the district, she has worked with the agency's Surface Water Regulatory Program, Water Resource Education Program, Certification Program Development, and Water Supply Planning. Her work as the Florida Water Star Coordinator involves administrating the program and technical outreach for the program. Deirdre works closely with the district staff in the development of regional water supply plans and coordinates a regional utility conservation coordinator network. Deirdre serves on the statewide Florida Friendly Landscaping Advisory Committee and on the board of the Florida Green Building Coalition. She also serves on the board of the National Green Builder Coalition. So we've got 2 dynamic speakers today talking about a very important topic. With that, I won't waste any more time. I will turn the floor over to Deirdre and Emily, and they're presenting Using Water Wisely, Irrigation Design Standards. Deirdre, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Tom. I definitely need to shorten up that bio for different purposes. But so I am Deirdre Irwin. I work with St. John's. I've been there a very long time. Clearly, I love what I do, and I'm very passionate about it. But today, I'm going to try and give everyone a high-level overview of where we are with our water supply, the constraints that we're experiencing, and Emily's going to share with us really a tool are a piece of the puzzle that's really important as we move forward using water a little more efficiently in the state. It's an important piece for us. So starting at the high level, as many of you know, there are 5 water management districts in Florida. We have a very wonderful state that is gotten tremendous prolific water sources, surface water, groundwater, springs. In my district, we have the St. Johns River flowing north from Indian River County all the way to Jacksonville. So for new residents of the state, it really does appear like, why would there ever be any issues with water supply in Florida? But we do have constraints. We get 90% of our water from the Floridan aquifer, and that source is particularly constrained throughout much of the state, certainly throughout all of the St. John's district. So the mission then of the district, I think it's a lot of people are not exactly sure what we do, and we have many different roles out there with surface water and groundwater. But ultimately, our mission statement is to protect our natural resources and support Florida's growth by ensuring sustainable use of Florida's water for the benefit of the people of the district and the state. So that's why I included that picture of a kind of a very rudimentary weighing scales. It's a balance. Our role is to protect those natural resources that are, so valuable in Florida, but also allow the state to have adequate water supply to grow. So I think everybody is aware that Florida continues to be a very fast-growing state. What really surprised me when I wanted to confirm the numbers, we hear all the time about 1,000 people a day moving to Florida. Well, based on this US Census data from 2021 and 22, it was more like 1,200 people, #1 state in the country for migration, and #2 in the world. So I guess we're a pretty popular spot to live in, which makes our role a little more challenging. In looking at the DEP report from 2020 of water use and projected population growth, you can see through 2040, we're going to see an increase in both population and water use in all of our typical categories. Then when we drill down a little bit and look at where that water is being used in St. John's district, so in those 18 counties in central and northeast Florida, we now are pumping over 1 billion gallons a day to supply public water supply, domestic self-supply, commercial, ag, landscape recreation, and power generation. Those are our major categories of water users. So that amount of water has gone up over the years. And I have to say, Florida has been very forward-thinking in figuring out how best to deal with growth and how to ensure that we do have adequate water supply. So in our Florida statutes, we have what's called water supply planning requirements. And these really kick in when it becomes apparent that we do not have adequate supply from our existing sources. So in order to meet the future reasonable beneficial uses of water in the state of Florida, the water management districts are required to develop these water supply plans and then update them every year. So a regional water supply plan have a 20-year planning horizon. They're updated every 5 years, and they essentially look at how much water is going to be needed for the growth in population. What are the available supplies? What is the projected use of water? And then where are we going to get that from? So we are in the midst for our 3 regions of answering all of those questions, updating these plans and working with our partners, our water users, to make sure that we can meet the demand. For example, here is the North Florida region. This one is interesting because it is a water supply planning region that overlaps into Swanee River Water Management District and the St. John's District. So we just published late last year the water supply plan for this region, and it does show there are constraints. Some of the water bodies on the west side here, the springs, rivers, and even some lakes in the in the Keystone Heights area are experiencing constraints due to excessive pumping on the East Coast. So those water bodies are connected in the aquifer, and activities on this East Coast area can affect the natural systems. So we have partnered with Swanee River Water Management and the DEP to focus on this region. So as we look at water supply planning and alternative sources, knowing that the aquifer source is constrained, we are very fortunate. We have options. This is not the Southwest US. We have many different options. None of them are as cheap as the existing source. So our current water supply is the aquifer, and that is, when you look at it per 1,000 gallons, between 125 and 175. And this is based on a research study from last year. The minute we start looking at reclaimed lower Floridan, so underneath the Floridan aquifer, there is in many parts of the state a lower Floridan aquifer that is proving to be a reliable source in some areas. But sinking wells into this lower aquifer is more expensive. We also have surface water options with our rivers and lakes. In some areas near the coast, we have brackish groundwater that needs to be treated. And then the big water drop over here is seawater. Florida is not lacking in ocean water. It is an option, but it is definitely the most expensive option. Then all the way over here, you see water conservation. Based on a study that JEA did for the cost of conservation and the savings, it is a very reliable alternative source and probably one of the cheapest. So it's not like a source of fresh water or something. It's demand management so that we use less water, and we preserve our source from the Floridan aquifer to stretch it out a bit further and perhaps probably not eliminate, but slow down the need for these more expensive sources of water. So as you can imagine, conservation is a priority at the district. And one of the statements that I like to quote comes from DEP, and it says, water conservation is the most important action we can take to sustain our current water supply, and it can delay expensive alternative projects and protect natural resources. Oops, sorry about that. So water conservation is a very valuable part of what we do. There are several of us who work in this field at the district with many different audiences. So I'm going to go into a little more detail on what that involves. The one thing we do look at for certain uses, like outdoor water use, we try to minimize the potable water sources. And we try and work with our utility partners, builders and developers to explore reclaimed water, beneficial use of stormwater, and even in some cases, there is some rainwater harvesting. And we're not short of that with 52 inches of rainfall every year. So let's drill down a little bit and see who's using the water. There's a lot of misperceptions out there on how much water is used for various products or for various uses within the district. So based on a lot of research here in Florida and nationally, on average, if the home has an irrigation system, in-ground automatic irrigation, at least 50% of that water is being used outdoors. Indoors, we've seen a reduction in water use as we see more efficient fixtures and appliances. As you know, we now have EPA water sense. The Florida Building Code requires not quite EPA water sense yet, but a higher standard than historically what was required in homes. Clothes washers and dishwashers have gotten tremendously efficient. So that has really helped us indoors. Outdoors, it's not as good news. There is, and I'm sorry, I forgot to quote it here, but the UF H2O Save geospatial database that tracks water use and has over 1 million homes in its database has really looked closely at how much water is being used in new homes that use both potable and reclaimed water. So of the homes that are using potable, you can see indoors 118 gallons per day, per household. That's not per person. And it's more than 50% outdoors, 133. With reclaim, that outdoor percentage is significantly more. We think that's because reclaimed water in many areas of the state is not restricted with what irrigation restrictions. So our focus is on outdoor use. We are not as engaged on the indoor, but we are very hyper-focused, I would say, on outdoor. So the ways that we achieve this, our water conservation efforts, are we have water use permits. So in my district, they're called consumptive use permits, and that is high water users are required. Oops, I'm sorry, I went on by mistake. They're required to get a permit. So if your diameter of your well is 6 inches or greater, or use 100,000 gallons a day, you must come to us for a water use permit. We have irrigation restriction rules telling you how long you can water and which days of the week. They are supposed to be a stopgap, high level. It's possible to sustain a yard on much less than the irrigation rules. We have landscape irrigation design codes at the local government, cities and counties on that require a certain level of efficiency of the irrigation system. We've got areas of the state that mandate certain green building certification. So the use voluntary incentives. So Florida Water Star is mandated for new homes in much of Polk County. And that is because they're experiencing excessive growth. And then it's strongly encouraged in many other areas because it guarantees less water. And then there's a new revised Florida-friendly landscape irrigation design standard. And I want to introduce Emily now, who is going to explain to us in more detail how more information about the design standards. So let me stop sharing, let Emily take over.
Emily, you're muted.
Yep, I realized that right as you said it. Thank you very much. So as Deirdre said, my name is Emily Lang, and I'm going to cover the landscape irrigation and Florida-friendly landscaping design standards. If you've not heard of the document, no worries. We're going to go over the background and the history of the standards, discuss both parts of it, both the landscape and irrigation design components and the Florida-friendly landscaping design components, and then how this document is going to be maintained moving forward as research and technology improves. So as Deirdre gave us an overview, how we manage water in Florida is very important. And this graphic in particular, I really enjoy because it's talking about how ongoing research at the University of Florida confirms that irrigation systems to continue to be one of the largest users of water in urban areas, with the average irrigation system running just one time using more water than an 8-hour shower that's using a low flow water sense shower head. So that's a lot of water that we're using on irrigation systems. So we want to make sure they're as efficient as possible. And these standards are really designed for our landscape and irrigation experts to use in the design and installation of efficient irrigation systems. But it's important to note that not every landscape is going to need a permanent in-ground irrigation system. So these standards are really developed for the specific times when it's been identified that an irrigation system is appropriate and determined necessary for a particular landscape. These standards are also a tool for local governments and municipalities, HOAs, and developers to implement effective outdoor water use reduction strategies and should be used when revising local codes and ordinances. And if we have time at the end, I think Deirdre is going to jump back on and give us a little more detail there. But before I get any further, I want to acknowledge all the groups that have come together to make these updates a reality. We were able to work with representatives from industry, state, local government, nonprofits, and more. And it really was a true collaboration. So shout out to all the groups that helped make this possible. Anytime that we are talking about sustainable landscaping in Florida, we really need to be talking about Florida-friendly landscaping. The FFL program has been recognized in statute as a best practice for protecting Florida's natural resources, And for over 30 years, the Department of Environmental Protection and the University of Florida have worked together to implement the program, which teaches home, commercial, and landscape professional audiences how to have a beautiful landscape that protects Florida's water quality and quantity. The program is centered around these 9 core principles, which were developed to represent comprehensive guidance for landscape design and maintenance. And in the end, a Florida-friendly landscape should not only be beautiful, but it should be an improvement to Florida's environment. With this in mind, the Landscape Irrigation and FFL Design Standards were originally developed in 2006, according to Section 373.228 of the Florida statutes. This most recent revision, and the only revision to date, has been an ongoing process and has really been led by the Florida Nursery Growers and Landscape Association, DEP, and our water management districts. But as I previously listed, there were many, many contributors, both ones listed in statute as contributors and others who came together. The standards are entirely based on the irrigation code as defined in Appendix F of the plumbing volume of the Florida Building Code. So it's important to note that nothing I talk about today is superseding the irrigation code. And the statute also directs that these standards and guidelines will be used by local governments when developing irrigation and FFL ordinances. So in summary, the statute is acknowledging that Florida's groundwater supplies has constraints, that FFL is a means for significant water conservation, and that the development of these standards should be used in local codes. The document itself is separated into 2 parts. Part 1 is the general Florida-friendly design standards, and Part 2 is detailed irrigation system design standards. And while the document itself goes into great detail on both topics, today we're only going to have time to talk about a few examples of each. Part 1 is guidance for landscape design that will maximize water conservation while designing and installing landscape plants that will thrive with minimal inputs. So let's look at some examples. Preservation. So a Florida-friendly landscape will minimize the impacts of construction by preserving natural site conditions as much as possible. For example, in this picture, by preserving the tree line and existing vegetation, such as large trees, we can protect wildlife habitat, maintain soil integrity, and reduce the heat island effect. In this particular photo, you can see that the root zone of that mature tree is being protected as far as the drip line. So that area that the leaves would drip, that's how far you should extend your protected area to make sure you're protecting that tree and preventing damage to the roots. Additionally, preserving native soils during construction can help reduce the need for irrigation and nutrients after the landscape has been established. And this is because the fill material that we use in construction doesn't have the same properties as the natural soils that are generally there at the surface level of your landscape. They're not going to retain moisture and they're not going to provide the nutrients as well. Now, in some cases during construction, it may be necessary to amend the soils and try to get the landscape soils back to that pre-construction value as an alternative when you can't preserve the native site conditions from the beginning. By protecting these native vegetation and soils, we're going to reduce the need for new vegetation. So if you're preserving large trees like in this picture, you're not going to need to fill that space with new plants, which would oftentimes going to require more irrigation in the beginning to get them established. Plant selection. So in any landscape design, whether it's new construction or just a new landscape being installed in a previous, area, the most important principle of Florida-friendly landscaping is right plant, right place, which is FFL principle number 1. This principle is taking into consideration the needs of the plants that you're wanting to have in your landscape. You want to consider everything that a plant needs to thrive, be it light levels, pH, soil drainage, and so on. By selecting a Florida-friendly plant and placing them in the ideal location, you can reduce the needs of that plant later on. For example, a native beautyberry tree might not need a lot of maintenance or irrigation or anything if you plant it in a shady area. But if you plant it in full sun, it's likely going to become discolored, and most people are going to assume that it needs more water, when really all it needed was to be planted in the right plant for that place. Right place for that plant. Mulch. Mulch is so important to a landscape, but it oftentimes gets overlooked. It is principle number 4 of Florida Friendly Landscaping Principles. And that's because not only does it provide a sense of uniformity and intentionality to a landscape, but it's extremely functional. Mulch helps to retain soil moisture, it protects plants from changing temperatures, and it helps us to suppress weed growth. But how you use that mulch is important. Ideally, you want 2 to 3 inches of an organic mulch, such as a leaf litter, utility mulch, pine bark, pine straw, or melaleuca. You don't want to use a non-organic mulch. So something such as rock or rubber chips is going to have the opposite effect as those organic mulches, and it's going to actually increase the soil heat, requiring more water and damaging the plant roots and surrounding soils. However, too little mulch, and you won't see the moisture retention benefits, and you will see those weeds, like you can see in that picture on the left. However, too much mulch at the plant base is often called volcano mulching, and that's that middle bottom photo. And that's going to trap moisture at the base of your plant, which can really encourage rot and other disease. So it's actually best if you have mulch that's not quite touching the base of your plant, but the area between the plants is well covered. However, you don't want to go too far on the other side of the extreme and have a yard full of mulch, because then you're not having the benefits of the plants themselves, and you're not meeting those Florida-friendly requirements. Moving on to part 2. This is really the meat and bones of where we get into the irrigation system design standards specific for our industry professionals. Again, the standards have a lot of best practices, but I'm just going to have time to touch on a few examples. To start us off, let's remember why poor design has real consequences. On the left, you can see the narrow strips of grass and big beds of mulch, which the grass itself is going to be incredibly difficult to irrigate or mow, and it would have been much better to have extended this garden bed or to have used a ground cover that's not going to require a lot of mowing or any mowing, and that could have been irrigated with micro irrigation if necessary. And then I'm sure you've all seen examples on the right where the irrigation system is watering the road, the sidewalk, the house, and everything else, but not so much the lawn itself, which is worst case scenario. So assuming that the landscape itself has been designed according to the Florida Friendly Landscaping Design Standards, each of your plant beds should be grouped according to the water needs of the the plants. So plants with like needs are going to be grouped together if you've designed your landscape according to Florida Friendly. And then the irrigation system can then be designed according to the needs of each of those groups of plants. The document is going to walk readers through the process of proper zoning, when and where and how to reduce sprinkler areas, and methods for incorporating micro irrigation into the design. For example, in this picture, these plant beds shouldn't be irrigated with the same stream of water that's irrigating turf grass areas. Instead, we should be using micro irrigation such as drip tubing that can be used to take the water and direct it directly at the plant's roots. So you're not losing water that's landing on leaves and mulch and all these other areas. Poor design and installation can disrupt what's called distribution uniformity, or DU. DU is the industry term to describe how evenly the irrigation system is distributing that water. So ideally, the water should be distributed evenly, especially when we're really talking about turf grass areas where the entire area needs the same amount of water. So the picture on the left would be a good distribution uniformity. All those grass blades are getting equal treatments of water. But if the DU is uneven, one side of the irrigation zone might receive too much water, which can result in all sorts of different types of disease and damage to your plants. Or other areas might receive not enough water, which can cause drought stress, even though the area is being irrigated. And in the worst case scenario, if you have really bad DU, you could have one area that's getting too much water and one area that's not getting enough. And then that's going to create a lot of maintenance difficulties trying to correct that once that lawn has been damaged. So these standards provide methods for improving distribution uniformity, such as making sure your pressure ranges and how that system itself is functioning. Sprinkler spacing is another important part of an irrigation system design. Just due to gravity, the area nearest the sprinkler head is often going to receive more water than the far end reach. So head-to-head spacing, where the water from one sprinkler head reaches to the other, is going to really ensure that you have that DU where the water is evenly distributed. On a kind of another note, the water source being used in the landscape is also important. So you may have noticed in Deirdre's presentation that a lot of times users who have access to reclaimed water, which is a secondary, lower level use of water, they're actually using more water. And while that is better than using potable water, we still want to be mindful that that's still an important resource, and we don't want to be wasteful with our water, even if it's reclaimed. And then more importantly, it needs to be labeled correctly as it is and be in compliance with Appendix F of the Florida Building Code. And the landscape manager, homeowner, whoever's running this irrigation system needs to be mindful that that reclaimed water is going to have higher levels of nutrients in it. And so you need to adjust your landscape practices overall to think about that. In the final section of the document, we provide guidance on proper operation and scheduling of the system. Now, we recognize that the designer and the installer, which is who this document is primarily written for, they're not always going to, or not usually, going to be the same person who is actually operating the irrigation system throughout the life of that landscape. But it is important for the landscape manager to understand how to use their new system, and there is some responsibility on the designer and installer for making sure they're sharing the best practices and handing off this landscape appropriately. The operation and scheduling section of the document goes over when and how to use different water conservation technology. For example, an automatic irrigation system is required by law to incorporate technology such as a rain shutoff device that is going to prevent the irrigation system from running in the rain. The standards are also going to provide instructions on how to pass that system over to the homeowner or the property manager. If the end user doesn't know how to use the system correctly, we've wasted our time designing it and installing it efficiently. So as we kind of discussed earlier, a newly installed landscape may need supplemental irrigation if there's not sufficient rainfall. And that's just because these new plants coming out of their nursery container, they don't have the root structure. They haven't been really established into the soils. So they may need a little more assistance when they've just been planted. But once the landscape is established, a lot can change. Especially in the winter, the landscape may go dormant. Especially in North Florida, your plants are going to slow down, and so should your irrigation schedule. And then in an established Florida-friendly landscape, it should be unnecessary to irrigate on a routine schedule at all. The easiest solution for the manager is to then just turn off the system and only turn it back on if the landscape is showing signs of drought stress and telling you that it really needs that water. So as you can see, this document really covers an extensive range of both landscape and irrigation best practices. But it's our hope that as these practices grow and improve and we get new research, so will the landscape irrigation and Florida-friendly landscaping design standards. The revisions we've discussed today are currently in the final stages of copy editing with our DEP staff and should be made available later this quarter. But in the future, we don't want to have such a long time frame between updates. So future revisions are intended to be made more frequently and for this to really be a living document so that as new research comes out, as new technology is invented, we're able to incorporate that into these standards in real time. If anybody has requests for future revisions, those can be submitted to either the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, or the Florida Nursery Growers and Landscape Association. And without further ado, I'll hand it back over to Deirdre.
Okay, thank you so much, Emily. Let me get rid of my shares. Go back to my share screen. You know, as you were speaking, Emily, I was thinking about maybe some people in the audience who don't work in the environmental field, irrigation field, or landscaping field. And it really is incredibly complex, this outdoor water use. It's not like flushing a toilet or a shower, or how long a shower runs. There are many, many entities who touch that use of water. So you have the designer, the installer, you have perhaps a short-term establishment landscape manager, and then you have either the homeowner or the maintenance company. We have learned in working closely with builders, developers, and HOAs that it's not always in the interests of those maintenance companies to use as little water as possible. And they're trying to make the landscape look as attractive, and often water is overused. So in our programs, the water management districts are trying to work very closely with the landscape designers, the HOAs, the builders, and then the maintenance companies, so that we can address any overuse of water from every angle. So the one thing I wanted to go over is why these standards were so important to us. In these water use permits that I mentioned earlier, and each of these permits require a water conservation plan. So any cities that you all live in, your utility is required to get a permit from a water management district and submit and maintain a water conservation plan. There's two kinds. We almost exclusively see what we call the standard plan. And the standard plan includes certain components that must be there. Education, outdoor component, indoor program, water loss, and there must be a program or audit process if the water loss of a utility exceeds 10%. That's a whole other topic and very, very detailed component of the permit. The rate structure. So having a water efficient rate structure that encourages reduction of water use. So as you might have, if you've lived in Florida a long time, when water is very, very cheap, people tend to use more. As we get a water conserving rate structure, the more you use, the more it costs, we do see change in behavior. So the idea is that all of these things together will work to reduce water use for the service area of that utility. Not only do you have to do all of these sections of a water conservation plan, you also have to identify the frequency, duration, and your implementation schedule of every piece. So it's really quite a detailed process. Part of my job is to work to train utilities on how best to design these plans and then implement them, and provide guidance, and partners, robust partners like the Extension Service can help a local government or utility implement their water conservation plan. The other component that I really want to share why these Florida-friendly landscape design requirements are so important is the permit also says there should be, the local government should adopt irrigation restriction ordinance, so that they're helping us to educate the public on irrigation, appropriate irrigation use, and landscape irrigation design standards. We encourage all of our local government permit holders to adopt a version of irrigation design standard. There has not been a consistent approach to this. Florida is like a patchwork of slightly different codes. So you can imagine if you're an irrigation designer in Orlando, where you have multiple counties, jurisdictions, all with slightly different codes, it can be really confusing to meet the requirements of the local code. That's why this new standard will be so helpful. As we roll it out and as folks come in to renew their permits with us, we'll be handing them this and saying, this is the version we'd like to see. So we're hoping that it will make things simpler for the designer, installer, and local government if we're all kind of on the same playbook. So once you get your permit, it's really important that it's a living document, and your water conservation plan is something you revise, you enforce. So I put together some of these thoughts, some ideas I had on successful programs that I've seen. So once you've developed a code, making sure it's enforced correctly. So when I work with a local government, my first question to them is, what can you afford to enforce? What kind of staff do you have? There is a process. There's submitting drawings, approving drawings, doing follow-up inspections, an as-built inspection after the irrigation system goes in. So understanding what you're going to be dealing with and who might be your partner. So a local government could perhaps partner with a utility who isn't part of government, who are already out of these homes doing inspections to enforce a code. We've looked at that model in the past. The next E is education. So codes can exist on the books, and there can be surprises when you go to build a development and you did not know about a code. So making sure that landscape irrigation design professionals are aware of these codes, and there really isn't a formal method to make that happen. We try to attend a lot of the industry conferences, and especially when there's a change, we set up meetings with our utilities to make them aware that this is an option, for instance, this new guideline. And then also evaluating it for success. Just because a code has been on the books for 25 years doesn't mean it's appropriate still. So like Emily was saying, renewing those design standards every 5 years will make sure we capture new approaches, new devices. Probably the biggest one to discuss would be the use of smart irrigation controllers. It's been like 20 years of slowly ramping up, but these devices can be revolutionary in terms of water savings, and they are now affordable. We've got many utilities that provide rebates, so you can have a device with an app on your phone, and if you're someone who lives outside of Florida for part of the year, you can adjust your irrigation system. So making sure that you revisit your codes and make sure that they are still appropriate for your service area. When I mentioned earlier on the regional water supply plans are showing signs of constraints. Well, we're working very closely with all of the utilities in our regions to help them understand that future growth has to be different. We cannot continue to grow in the same way with the same type of water use. So that's where evaluating these local codes is important. If it's not a local government getting a permit from us, just an aside, the CC&R, codes, covenants, and restriction language for a new development can be used like a local code to make sure that the irrigation design is not altered and it's maintained over time. So a lot of our work is with HOAs, making sure they have good CC&R language and good education and training for homeowners. And I think that is my last slide. So one of our campaigns at St. John's District is to water less, to not rely on your irrigation system as your everyday use. It should be supplementary to irrigation, or to rainfall. So rainfall is our #1 source of water for our landscapes. Irrigation is second. So that scheduling of your controller is really essential. And we are done in plenty of time, it seems like. I'm going to stop sharing, Tom, and let you, maybe we can address some questions.
Fantastic, Deirdre and Emily. Thank you very much for both. It's an exciting time because this is a document that's been needing to be updated for some time, and this is going to be a huge asset, I think, to the industry. We do have a few questions that came up. I'll let either one of you take it. I won't assign it to either one of you, but what are your thoughts on homemade water collecting systems?
I've seen a few in my time. So about 10 years ago, we had a task force who was dedicating a lot of time to rainwater harvesting. So first of all, if you're from the West Coast, you are allowed to harvest your rainfall in Florida. I know their rules are different in areas like Colorado and out west, but you are allowed to harvest rainfall. It is rarely the cheapest option. That is the reality. So after tremendous work, Tampa Bay Water developed a really good manual in how to design, install, and maintain rainwater harvesting system. It can be done for an entire house. I've seen several of them. it's usually just cost prohibitive compared to utility water supply. But it certainly is possible, and it may be something we look more closely at in the future.
Right. Next question. Why not make the standards required instead of voluntary? What would be involved in that process?
Well, the standards are supposed to be in statute recommendations or guidelines, but where it can become mandatory is in that as we work with our local governments and they develop their consumptive use permit, water conservation plans, and we are encouraging the adoption of a local code. Most of them come to us with this. We work closely with the local governments on this. We now have this consistent, well-written sample guideline for them to use in developing these codes. So it isn't going to be an overnight, everyone must adopt this code. It's going to be happening as they come in for their permit renewals. And we will be out there pitching it at every opportunity.
Yeah, certainly will. That's great. How should irrigation installers provide information to homeowners, so that they'll be better educated? What are your thoughts on, how we can get this transition from, the installation to the users?
Well, if anyone's bought a house in Florida, it's a little overwhelming. You get so much from your builder. You're getting phone calls from water softening companies like daily for that first 6 months. And we have learned that it's very hard for them to absorb all of this, especially if they've never had an in-ground irrigation system. So one of the things we've done with Florida Water Star is we wait 3 months and then we send out a package and instructions. Many of our homeowners, especially if they're from out of state, rely on their landscape irrigation professionals. And I have to say kudos to FFL for developing a new certification program for those folks, because you frequently might be relying on someone who's never actually been professionally trained in the topic to tell you how to run your irrigation system. So what we try to do is get to the HOA, develop newsletter articles for HOA newsletters, work with these maintenance companies who may or may not have any background or training and get them up to speed. So there's no one right way to get to homeowners. We just tried from many different angles, and they call us. I get calls all the time. Why is my bill so high? Why am I watering every day? I'm like, shouldn't be watering every day.
Awesome. Have you heard of any pressure to change how we irrigate or plant the highway medians? Encouraging more ground cover use as opposed to turf.
Yeah, Emily, I don't want to assume that you want me to answer all the questions, but
there's no statute or anything that requires it. The Florida Department of Transportation, there is statute that roughly says that they should be utilizing Florida-friendly practices as much as possible. And if you have driven down the turnpike or any other major highway recently, like I have, you'll see there's a lot more native wildflower ground covers and things like that. So I do think the transition is happening. It's just going to take time, and it really depends on who is responsible for managing that part of the roadway. So that can get a little complicated, whether or not it's the state or the city or the county responsible for those medians. But I know, for example, here in Tallahassee, we're seeing a lot more sunshine mimosa and perennial peanut rather than traditional turf grass in our medians. And I think that's just becoming more normal as the supply and the resources for those plants is becoming more available. So I think you're going to see that trend kind of naturally shift.
Yeah, I agree. I'm seeing a lot more of it recently in Jacksonville, beside where I live. A lot of money has been spent replanting medians and using micro irrigation to irrigate the ground cover. And I think the reality is the bottom line, they are cheaper to maintain. Local governments can maintain these medians that have ground covers a whole lot cheaper than mowing them every week, especially in the summer.
Yeah, it's going to come down to the saving dollars and, you know, and what's good for the environment too. So I think that's great. Let's see what else. There's a bunch of questions that have come in. I see one person that wants recommendations for how we hand water. You know, obviously, you know, as Emily mentioned, that's number one, choosing the right plant for the right place. Making sure that we have good plants in, and then just getting them established. Sometimes starting with a small plant may establish faster than a larger plant. So if that's an option in whatever landscape setting that you're in, that may be good. And then, you know, you're hand watering until you can get that plant established, then it should survive, you know, mostly on its own without supplemental irrigation. You know, except during really extended drought periods where you may have to provide some supplemental irrigation to it. But really, it's just a matter of there are plenty of sprinkler options that are out there, or just depends how big that area is. So it's going to be different for each area. I would recommend that they contact their local extension office if they need some guidance in that area. Let's see what other
there's a really good paper from UF on establishing shrubs in Florida that tells you the actual volume of water to and frequency of watering for establishing them. Maybe Claire or someone can drop it in the chat, but I believe it's called Establishing Shrubs, Trees and Shrubs in Florida.
Yeah, and it's really good because it will, as you mentioned, give specifics as to, you know, how much water. And I think the research showed that you know, you can apply more water, but you're not going to get better establishment with more water. So it's kind of it provides that threshold.
You don't want people having to recharge the aquifer just to establish a plant. Just use enough water for that plant.
Let's see. How can local municipalities be pressured into adapting existing older sprinkler systems into improvements to abide by water reuse / supply permit application?
Okay. So we have a cost share program, as do most of the districts, and we are very engaged in outdoor water use with cost share. So right now, actually, we're dealing with one of our local governments who wants to retrofit entire medians and parkways, but they didn't have the funding, so they're applying for 50% cost share from the district in order to do that and add smart controllers. So funding really, they want to do it, but they don't always have a budget line item to pay for it.
Some of the chats I'm seeing, you know, so particular landscape company, they say they always provide water schedule and irrigation information to their their CAMs. So, you know, this is a trend. I think that we're seeing people want to do the right thing and want to educate their folks. So I think that's really good. Claire did drop that establishing shrubs in Florida landscape document into the chat, so it's there. And also she put a link for establishing trees in the landscape as well. So both those links are there. I think that caught most of the pertinent questions. I want to thank you guys so much for providing so much great information to this audience on this incredibly important topic. I can't wait for the document to be complete. I know it's close, and you know, it'll be out there and be a resource for everybody. I did want to remind everybody that on March 12th at 10 a.m. We'll have our next webinar, and that's Dr. Laura Warner presenting on wildlife-friendly landscaping, connecting professionals and the public. Please remember, everybody, to fill out your evaluation that pops up on your screen. It does help us to provide the topics that are important to you. So we're always looking for innovative new topics that we can add to next year's. And just as a reminder, these are all available on the Florida Friendly Landscaping website. You can always go back and watch any of the recorded webinars. We do archive them to the website, so it's a good educational resource, especially on a rainy day. So everybody, thank you so much. Deirdre, Emily, thank you. You were awesome. And everybody, I hope you have a great day.